We come to Genesis chapter 31 now. Genesis 31. And he heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and of that which was our father's has he gotten all this glory. And so Laban's sons are turning against Jacob. They're beginning to notice that he is getting wealthy, and their father, which means their inheritance, is getting smaller. 2. And Jacob beheld the countenance of Laban, and behold, it was not toward him as before. And God is blessing Jacob, and Laban doesn't like it. And he doesn't like Jacob. 3. And the Lord said to Jacob, Return to the land of your fathers, and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Time to go home, Jacob. You know, it's getting pretty heated over here, and probably to save Jacob and his family from a lot of trouble, God tells him to move on. Verse 4. And Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field to his flock. So Jacob has to talk to his wives in secret, away from Laban and his sons. They find out that Jacob plans on leaving with his wealth and family. You better watch out. 5. And said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not toward me as before, but the God of my father has been with me. In other words, your father has been against me, and he is against me, but God is for me. Nevertheless, there's no reason to stick around, as we will see. And you know that with all my power I have served your father. And he did. Jacob gave his best. And he wasn't recompensed as he should have been, at least not by Laban. God took care of him. 7. And your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God allowed him not to hurt me. God only let Laban go so far against Jacob. And God has a leash on the things that come into our lives as his children. They can only go so far. They can only do so much damage and no more. And you say, well, what's the deciding factor? God is the deciding factor in his sovereign will and our long-term spiritual good as well. Verse 8. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the cattle bore speckled. And if he said thus, the ring-straight shall be your hire, then bore all the cattle ring-straight. So God was always one step ahead of Laban on behalf of Jacob. Every time he changed the rules of the game, God was out in front, making sure those rules were a blessing to his child Jacob. Verse 9. Thus God has taken away the cattle of your father and given them to me. So it wasn't Jacob who took it, it was God. And God can do whatever he wants to, because the Bible says that God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. In other words, everything on the earth, including the earth itself, belongs to God. He gives it to whoever he wants to give it to. Verse 10, and it came to pass at the time that the cattle conceived, that I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leaped upon the cattle were ring-straight, speckled, and grizzled. And so the Lord gave Jacob a behind-the-scenes view of what was happening. He wanted Jacob to know that it was God who helped him become wealthy, not his superstitious schemes of peeling back bark off of sticks. 11. And the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here am I. And he said, Lift up now your eyes and see. All the rams which leap upon the cattle are ring-straight, speckled, and grizzled. For I have seen all that Laban does to you. God can see everything, including DNA. So God looked into the genetic structure of the sheep. He saw which ones carried genes for spots, and he caused those animals to conceive. And that's why Jacob became wealthy. Verse 13. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you vowed a vow to me. Now arise, get you out from this land, and return to the land of your kindred. It's been 20 years since Jacob left home, and it's time to go back. He has 11 boys, 1 girl, and they need to be raised in the Holy Land. 14. And Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, Is there yet any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? In other words, what are we doing here? We're not benefiting from living at home either. 15. Are we not counted of him as strangers? For he has sold us and has quite devoured also our money. So Laban devoured the dowry, which should have been set aside as sort of an insurance policy for these daughters of his. But he just squandered it. He spent it on himself. 16. For all the riches which God has taken from our father, that is ours and our children's. Now then, whatsoever God has said to you, do. These daughters knew their father was a crook. And they knew that God was just giving Jacob, he was just by giving Jacob the wealth that he had at the expense of his father. And they knew Jacob was a man of God, so they're willing to follow him. You know, godliness does produce confidence. When a man is godly, his wife and his children have a sense of well-being. Verse 17. Then Jacob arose up and set his sons and his wives upon camels. And he carried away all his cattle and all his goods which he had gotten, the cattle of his getting which he had gotten in Padan Aram, for to go to Isaac his father in the land of Canaan. And Laban went to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the images that were her father's. And here we see one more reason for Jacob to get his family out of there. There was a lot of idolatry in Laban's household. And no good if it spreads to Jacob's family. Verse 20. And Jacob stole away unawares to Laban the Syrian, in that he told him not that he fled. So he fled with all that he had, and he rose up and passed over the river and set his face toward the Mount Gilead. Laban's out of town, and Jacob wants to leave without trouble. So he takes advantage of his absence, and he leaves, packs up and takes off. Everything that he has. 22. And it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob was fled. And he took his brethren with him, and pursued after him 7 days' journey, and they overtook him in the Mount Gilead. Laban was upset. He traveled 45 miles a day on a camel for 7 straight days in order to catch up to Jacob. He must have been steaming. 24. And God came to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, Take heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. And so God warns Laban not to give Jacob a hard time. God knew what Laban intended to do, whatever it was. And he said, don't you do it. Verse 25. Then Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mount, and Laban with his brethren pitched in the mount of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What have you done, that you have stolen away unawares to me, and carried away my daughters as captives taken with the sword? Well, that's not true. Laban had in essence sold his daughters. They belonged to Jacob, and he was free to leave any time he wanted to, and that's what he did. So the first thing that comes out of Laban's mouth is a lie. Jacob did not cheat Laban, and he didn't take his daughters away at gunpoint either, like Laban suggests. 27. Look at this. Wherefore did you flee away secretly and steal away from me, and did not tell me, that I might have sent you away with mirth and with songs and tabret and with harp? I would have been so happy that you were returning home. If that's what you really wanted to do, I would have sent you away with a party. And he's telling another lie. Verse 28. And have not allowed me to kiss my sons and my daughters. You have now done foolishly in so doing. Well, things don't happen in a vacuum. And Jacob's no fool. And Jacob's no ungodly man. In spite of his flaws, he is a man of God. And when a man of God feels fearful and takes off, and especially when God tells him to do it, he's doing the right thing, no matter who doesn't like it. And it's not foolish, as Laban suggests. Verse 30. No, actually verse 29. It is in the power of my hand to do you hurt. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Take you heed that you speak not to Jacob either good or bad. Laban was more powerful than Jacob as far as the world is concerned, but it doesn't matter because God is more powerful than Laban, and God is on Jacob's side because Jacob is on the side of right. Verse 30. And now, though you would needs be gone, because you sore long after your father's house, yet wherefore have you stolen my gods? And Jacob right now has no idea what he's talking about. Verse 31. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid. For I said, Perhaps you would take by force your daughters from me. I didn't think you'd let me leave. I worked for your daughters for 14 years. I've got a family here, and I wasn't sure that you wouldn't keep them by force. Maybe sell them. That's probably what Jacob was thinking. It wouldn't surprise me. 31. And Jacob answered and said to him, Because I was afraid, for perhaps you would take by force your daughters from me. With whomsoever you find your gods, let them not live. Before our brethren discern you what is yours with me, and take it to you. For Jacob knew not that Rachel had stolen them. Jacob's confident. He thinks Laban is lying about the idols, just like he has lied about so many other things. But this time Laban was correct, at least about that. 33. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, and into Leah's tent, and into the two maidservants' tents, but he found them not. Then went he out of Leah's tent, and entered into Rachel's tent. Laban was looking primarily for idols, but you can bet that he would be happy to find anything that belonged to him, even a shoestring. Because if he finds anything, he'll start ranting and raving and use it as an excuse to hurt Jacob in some way, if he thinks he can get away with it. 34. Now Rachel had taken the images and put them in the camel's furniture and sat upon them. And Laban searched all the tent, but found them not. Back in those days, travelers would strap about a 3-foot box to the back of their camel, and then they would put their saddle on top of that box. Well, the box was used to store things while traveling, sort of like a trunk. Rachel has that box in her tent, and she is sitting on it. And guess what's in there? You guessed it. The idols. Verse 34 says it. Verse 35. And she said to her father, Let it not displease my lord that I cannot rise up before you, for the custom of women is upon me. And he searched, but found not the images. Laban searched hard and came up empty. And he's going to get it from Jacob now. 36. And Jacob was angry and chode with Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, What is my trespass? What is my sin, that you have so hotly pursued after me? Jacob had suffered in silence for 20 years But when Laban accused him of stealing idols in front of everyone, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That was a public attack on his character, and that deserves a response. Verse 37. Whereas you have searched all my stuff, what have you found of all your household stuff? Set it here before my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. In other words, you've accused me of stealing in front of everyone, so now let's see the evidence, Laban. 38. This 20 years have I been with you. Your ewes and your she-goats have not cast their young, and the rams of your flock have I not eaten. That which was torn of beast I brought not to you. I bore the loss of it. Of my hand did you require it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. Good-hearted Jacob paid for all the losses that occurred to Laban's flock. He paid even if it wasn't his fault. 40. Thus I was in the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus have I been 20 years in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters and 6 years for your cattle, and you have changed my wages 10 times. Jacob lived in a nightmare of deception for 20 lousy years. And you know what? God allowed it all to teach him a lesson. Submission is an inescapable part of life. People will either submit to God or they will submit to the consequences of their rebellion. 20 years earlier, Jacob deceived his father. 20 years earlier, he rebelled against God and mistreated his brother. And consequently, for 20 years, Jacob was mistreated and deceived by his uncle Laban. Verse 42. Except the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely you had sent me away now empty. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands, and rebuked you last night. And listen to Laban in verse 43. Laban answered and said to Jacob, These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and these cattle are my cattle, and all that you see is mine. And what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children, which they have borne? Laban has just experienced a verbal knockout from Jacob. Laban was guilty of everything Jacob had said. Laban should repent and apologize and confess, but he won't. What does he do instead? He changes the subject. He avoids the issue. He makes all sorts of hollow claims. He says, everything belongs to me. Well, what does that have to do with anything? Even if it were true, which it wasn't, so what? You know, some people will not confess or apologize, no matter how much evidence proves their guilt. They may change the subject, or make up excuses, or lie, but they will not apologize. And those are the type of people who deserve to be shunned. If they want to live in non-reality, perhaps they should live there by themselves. Give everybody else a break. 44. Now therefore, come you, let us make a covenant, I and you, and let it be a witness between me and you. So Laban wants to make an agreement with Jacob. He can't beat him, so he might as well create an atmosphere of non-aggression. That's the best he can hope for. 45. And Jacob took a stone and set it up for a pillar. Jacob wants peace. He's not going to hold a grudge. Bitter people are not godly people. And godly people are not contentious people. 46. And Jacob said to his brethren, Gather stones. And they took stones, and made a heap, and they did eat there upon the heap. Treaty ceremony would often include a meal. Eating together was a symbol of friendship, so they're going to sign this treaty. They're going to have a meal together. 47. And Laban called it Jegar Shahadutha, but Jacob called it Galeed. And Laban said, This heap is a witness between me and you this day. Therefore was the name of it called Galeed. And Mizpah, for he said, The Lord watch between me and you when we are absent one from another. These two men didn't trust each other at all. And so they asked God to watch each other with a view to stopping any sinister plot either of them might devise against the other. That's what this is about. Verse 50. If you shall afflict my daughters, or if you shall take other wives besides my daughters, no man is with us. See, God is witness between me and you. Laban had led Jacob into polygamy with his two daughters, but he doesn't want Jacob to take any more wives than he has. He wants his daughters to be treated kindly, even though he didn't treat them kindly in the past. It does seem as if Laban is starting to care about his daughters now that he's about to lose them. You know, often when the time is short, people will start showering the kindness on people that they should have shown all along. 51. And Laban said to Jacob, Behold this heap, and behold this pillar, which I have cast between me and you. So the stones had been gathered by Jacob's men. The pillar had been erected by Jacob himself. But did you notice how Laban says, Jacob, see this pillar and this heap which I have set up? I guess old habits are hard to break, huh? Laban still has that what's yours is mine attitude. 52. This heap be a witness, and this pillar be witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and that you shall not pass over this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Verse 54. Then Jacob offered sacrifice upon the mount, and called his brethren to eat bread. And they did eat bread, and tarried all night in the mount. So this feast lasted all day. And for that reason they spent the night there. In verse 55, and early in the morning Laban rose up, kissed his sons and his daughters, and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned to his place. And with this, Laban disappears from the pages of Scripture. Next time, Jacob returns home. In the next chapter, he returns home and meets up with his brother, the one that he cheated, and who swore to kill Jacob as a result. And we're going to see that in verse 32.